following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
To order this October 2nd meeting of the Cary Town Council, quasi-judicial meeting. And at this time, I'd ask that you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Our first quasi-judicial public hearing is for Sherwood at Regency Subdivision Plan. An overview of the hearing procedures and detailed rules are attached to the printed agenda. All speakers who want to speak during this public hearing must be administered an oath by Mrs. Johnson, who's on my right, and we'll pause for a moment at this time so those individuals who would like to speak at the public hearing can approach Mrs. Johnson and receive their oaths. I'm going to pause until that has been completed.
I didn't know that. Just yeah, no, they're learning it all night.
Read on that.
This one?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Sure. When would you like to do that? Right now? Okay, before we poll the council. Okay. So I'll welcome you and then you can. That'd be great. Okay. As we begin our public hearing, I'd first like to introduce our attorney this evening, John Silverstein. I understand you have a guest with you this evening.
I do, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. The Wake County Bar Association participates with Campbell Law School in a mentorship program, and I have the privilege of having a mentee this year, Davis per year from Fayetteville, and he's here this evening. And so
Welcome.
to observe the proceedings and see what a quasi-judicial proceeding is like. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity for him to come.
Lucky you.
So please don't ask me any questions, right?
Oh, I'm already making a list.
Thanks, Ms. Adcock.
Okay, I'll now ask council members if they've had any site visits, ex parte communications, financial relationships, special knowledge, or close relationship to an affected person to disclose, starting on my left. Mr. Urhoff.
No, sir, I have not.
Ms. Bush?
No.
Mr. France?
No, never, none.
I have not. Mr. Smith?
Sir, I met I was at the neighborhood meeting months ago, years ago, a long time ago, and I was introduced and was asked to say a few words, and I basically talked about the process, and that was the extent of it.
And do you think that would impact your ability to be fair and impartial on this vote?
Since I didn't understand anything that wasn't presented yet, yes, sir, I do.
Okay, Ms. Robinson?
Okay, I have no contact.
Ms. Adcock?
None, Mayor.
Okay, very good. Based on the disclosures we've heard from our council members, at this time, I would invite anyone to the podium who has been sworn in to speak if you have an objection to a council member's participation in this hearing. Seeing no one, I'll proceed. I'll open the quasi-judicial public hearing at this time and recognize Mr. Hales of our staff who will introduce the hearing. Mr. Hales.
Good evening, Council. I'd first like to take a moment to briefly inform Council about some changes to the format of the presentation, which you've seen over the past few months. As normal, staff will be providing the introductory information and basic factual information about the case. However, the presentation, or the first half of the presentation, will not include the normal staff analysis that you're used to hearing at that time. Following that brief presentation, the applicant will be making their case and presenting evidence in support of their application. Other speakers will then have their opportunity to speak either for or against the case, and then staff will return to the podium afterward to provide their analysis of the applicant's requests. So I just want to make you aware of that because it will be a little different.
And I'll try to follow that procedure and process, and if I don't, please interrupt me.
It'll be fine. So the first hearing on tonight's agenda is a request by Bass, Nixon, and Kennedy on behalf of the property owner and developer for approval of a subdivision plan for approximately 18.5 acres located on the northern side of Penny Road, slightly west of the intersection with Ederly Drive. It is located on the northern side of Penny Road near the intersection with Killingsworth Drive. The project is an infill development. It's surrounded on three sides by a windfall subdivision. That development was developed in the mid-90s. The fact that it's infill does have a little bit of bearing on the case. This is not a future phase of the existing developments. Those were developed almost 20 years ago. So this infill site does have different development regulations that were in place 20 years ago. And that is some of the basis for the request you'll be hearing tonight. The site is located along a future C-Tran route. There is currently no plans in the town's capital improvement budget to extend the route along this corridor in the near future. The Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan does indicate a 10-foot street side trail, which was formerly known as a multi-use trail, running along the northern side of Penny Road. This would extend westward toward the municipality boundary with Apex, and east toward another planned multi-use trail, street side trail, running along Ederly Drive into the Regency recreational areas. The site is impacted by a single stream buffer that runs north-south through the site. It separates off approximately a third of the subject property to the east versus 2/3 of the property to the west. This is drawn from our GIS maps, so it does over-exaggerate the length of that stream buffer. Field determinations, and you'll see on the site plan, show that buffer being slightly shorter than it is here. Property was rezoned to residential 20 conditional use late last year. The conditions on that conditional use zoning were related to density, restricting the number of lots in the subdivision to no more than 20, and dealing with dimensional standards, restricting or setting the minimum lot width at 100 foot and the minimum roadway setback to 35 feet. Subject properties are currently developed with a single residential dwelling that's proposed to remain in place during development. They're carving out a new lot around the existing house. The remainder of the property is wooded with predominantly a hardwood canopy, some small pines along the edges where it's been disturbed. This is a view from Moreland Court, which is in the existing subdivision to the north, just showing kind of the existing tree cover and the density of the edge of the forest stands. So, as I mentioned earlier, the applicant is proposing development of a residential subdivision, and it consists of 20 lots, which is what was set by the conditional use rezoning. Almost half of those lots, 9 of them to be precise, would be accessed via existing roads in the surrounding subdivisions. So Royal Glen Drive along the western edge, Greyfriars Lane to the north, and Moreland Court to the east. The remaining 11 lots would be accessed via a new cul-de-sac being proposed by the applicant. Stormwater treatment for the site is being accomplished or accommodated through the use of 2 bioretention areas, one at the northern end of the site, the dark blue area at the end of the cul-de-sac, and the other at the southern end of the stream buffer, adjacent to the streetscape. The applicant is providing the 50-foot type A streetscape required along a thoroughfare for residential development along Penny Road. And because this development is residential detached dwellings, lots over 8,000 square foot, just as the surrounding development, there are no actual perimeter buffers required. However, at the time of development, there is a 20-foot type B landscape area that will be planted and required to be meet the type B standard at CO, but there's no long-term protection there. The applicant's subdivision plan does include several minor modifications or modifications to development standards of the town. The first of those being a modification to the connectivity index. Items 2, 3, and 4 relate to improvements along the Penny Road frontage. And the 5th item is removal and replacement of 2 champion trees on the site. The connectivity index established by the land development ordinance is a ratio between street segments and street nodes or intersections. The LDO requires that ratio to be 1.2 or higher. The proposed subdivision consists of a single street segment being the length of the cul-de-sac and 2 nodes, the intersection with Royal Glen Drive and the cul-de-sac bulb itself, resulting in a connectivity index of 0.5. So that's obviously below the 1.2 required by the ordinance. The LDO also requires for subdivisions where that connectivity index has been modified that the applicant provide additional pedestrian connections linking cul-de-sacs. A 6-foot paved trail is what it says. And the LDO goes further to say that a pedestrian route does not need to meet accessibility requirements. Second request the applicant is making is for right-of-way dedication modification. The comprehensive transportation plan of the town requires a 100-foot right-of-way for the 4-lane median divided roadway identified in the plan for Penny Road. The applicant or the development would normally be required or is required by the ordinance to provide half of that 100-foot right-of-way corridor measured from the existing center line of the right-of-way, or 50 feet. That is the dashed red line you see in this drawing. The applicant has requested instead to dedicate 1/2 of a 79-foot right-of-way, approximately 39.5 feet. That's shown on this drawing as the heavier black line defining the southern edge of the streetscape. In addition to the modifications to the right-of-way dedication, the LDO requires, or in addition to the right-of-way dedication, the LDO requires actual physical construction of improvements along the road frontage of the development. The 4-lane median divided cross-section for Penny Road called for in the comprehensive transportation plan consists of 78 feet street section measured from back of curb to back of curb. That again, is shown as the blue line on this map where the existing, where the ultimate pavement would be based on the CTP. Applicant has requested instead to provide or to construct 1/2 of a 60-foot cross-section measured back of curb to back of curb, which would actually be 30 feet from the right-of-way center line. That's shown as the heavy gray shading on this drawing. As mentioned earlier, the Parks and Recreation Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan identifies a 10-foot street side trail along the project frontage. Trail would generally be located partially within the right-of-way. However, it would meander outside the right-of-way into the streetscape, usually requiring the additional dedication of a greenway easement to contain portions of that trail. The LDO does require development to install street side trails where they're identified by the master plan in lieu of the 5-foot sidewalk normally required. However, the applicant has requested to neither construct that multi-use trail nor to provide easement in case the town would want to make that improvement in the future. What they are proposing instead is a 5-foot sidewalk, shown here by the dashed yellow line. It is contained within the proposed right-of-way at the western end of the site. As you move east, it moves out of the right-of-way into the streetscape, so they're proposing an easement. The fifth and final modification being requested by the applicant is removal and replacement of 2 champion trees on the site. The applicant did do a tree survey as part of their submittal and identified 10 trees in excess of 32 inches, which is the new definition of champion tree recently adopted by Town Council. Of those 10 trees, the applicant is proposing to remove 2 of those trees identified as tree 2, located at the northern end of the cul-de-sac, and tree 9, located adjacent to the right-of-way along Penny Road. That concludes staff's presentation or introduction to the project. We will have additional analysis available for council to consider following the applicant's testimony and the speaker's testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. This time I'll call on the applicant's attorney to present arguments and evidence in support of the application by addressing the applicable approval criteria.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the applicant. Here with me tonight is Mr. Kurt Berger with K. Hovnanian Homes, Robbie Bell, who's an engineer with Bass, Nixon & Kennedy, who will be providing testimony related to the plans that you all have seen. And finally, Jeff Hokenottle, who is a transportation engineer with SEPI Engineering, who will be providing information with respect to traffic impacts anticipated to be generated by this development. I'm excited to present this case to you all, quite frankly. Oftentimes, I'm in front of you all with cases that are challenging, where we're trying to fit a piece into a puzzle that might not make sense for everybody involved, and I think this is a case that makes sense. These are minimum 20,000 square foot lots. Some of those lots that are shown on the plan, as you go down to the bottom right-hand portion, let's see if I can get him to wake up. I mean, some of these lots are in excess of 40,000 square feet. I mean, this is a plan that makes a lot of sense. It is being developed consistent with the adjacent areas. It is providing sidewalk connections to the existing infrastructure. And while, as Kevin pointed out, it's not a part of the previously approved development, it's essentially fitting in that fashion. And I've got Kevin, I don't know how quickly we can get to the exhibit that's not the clearest exhibit in the world. And this exhibit is tough to see, but I kind of pulled the focus out a little bit, and this is a broader view of the Regency area, and this is Penny Road, this is 1010, and I just kind of wanted to show the development we're working on is in this section here, and it's one of those where if you it just fits. Nothing looks out of character with respect to the manner in which it's laid out, including the cul-de-sac. And what you'll hear from our experts momentarily is why we're incorporating cul-de-sacs. But putting aside the justification for providing cul-de-sacs, and we've got those, cul-de-sacs are not atypical in Regency. In fact, they're all over the place, and the sidewalk connections are the same way. So I do believe that this is a development project that just makes sense and it fits. Notwithstanding that, because we've got developments that were built 20 years ago around us and we're currently being subjected to the existing ordinance, there are minor modifications that are being requested as part of this plan. I want to touch on those briefly, and then I'll hand it off to the people who will be providing the actual evidence. But what you will hear from them are essentially that the modifications that we are seeking are based upon, one, our intent to make the development harmonious with the existing built environment, or two, to protect environmentally sensitive features that are located on the property. In the slide that Kevin showed you, there is a creek that essentially bisects this property and creates kind of an eastern portion of the development and a western portion of the development. Regarding the champion trees, we're seeking to remove 2 and we're saving 8, as Kevin indicated in his presentation. One of those trees that we're seeking to remove is located in a very low-lying portion of the development. It is in this vicinity here, and it's in the place where the BMP needs to go. That's Mother Nature says the water needs to go in that place, and that's where the BMP needs to go. And the other one is being impacted by improvements made associated with the Penny Road installation of the sidewalk. So that is essentially the justification for why we're seeking to remove those two champion trees. With respect to connectivity, we've requested these modifications so that the stream that bisects the property won't be disturbed. The code would have us essentially take a road and cross in this fashion and connect to what is an existing cul-de-sac. And what's kind of unique about this plan, and you'll hear from the testimony that will be provided, this cul-de-sac exists. There are existing lots and existing homes that have been built on this cul-de-sac. So we're essentially fitting homes onto a puzzle piece that's already on the floor. So again, not crossing the stream is something that we don't think is necessary. We don't think we're being good stewards of the environment to provide a connection that really just doesn't make sense and is not consistent with what's built around it. With respect to the comprehensive transportation plan improvements, again, what we are trying to do, or what we're seeking to do, is to improve the plan. And there's an aerial here. We'll go to, yeah, that works. Again, this is already built out. There's an existing residential subdivision. This is already built out. It's an existing residential subdivision. Those aren't going anywhere anytime soon. What we are proposing is a road width that is entirely consistent with what's already on the ground. We're proposing a sidewalk connection that's entirely consistent with what's on the ground. Again, it will feel incredibly seamless when you look down. It won't appear that a modification was made to development standards that otherwise should have applied to the property. When you drive past the site, it will be just like everything around it. So the primary justification for that modification, or those modifications, is that we're trying to be consistent with the environment that we are developing in. So with that, I think the testimony that you'll hear tonight from our experts is that the minor modifications are justified, and that the evidence supports a finding that we meet the requirements for approval of a sketch plan. At this time, I will call my first witness, Mr. Kurt Berger, on behalf of K. Hovnanian Homes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council. My name is Kurt Berger. I'm the division president for K. Hovnanian Homes of North Carolina, the applicant. I've spent 29 years in the home building industry, the last 10 of which have been in the division president capacity here in the Raleigh, Cary, Chapel Hill, Durham area. During those 29 years, I've overseen the development of more than 200 subdivisions, yielding approximately 20,000 lots. I'm excited to be here tonight as well. We've been working on the site for quite some time now, and this is the culmination of all of that hard work. If the council recalls, we started this process over a year ago with the rezoning of the property to R20 conditional use. If you recall, that the two side parcels were actually, I believe, is R12, and so we helped make this neighborhood through zoning more compatible than perhaps it was. We're proud of that. Over the past year, we've worked diligently with the residents in the surrounding Regency community to address to satisfy their concerns and their requests, with the goal of creating a seamless and timeless infill project that looks and feels as if it was developed in the original neighborhood in the 1990s. The Regency Homeowners Association approached us earlier in the year about the possibility of us annexing our project, our lots, into their HOA, as opposed to having our own separate, smaller HOA. In fact, with the support of the Board of Directors, the neighborhood resident annexation vote is ongoing right now over a couple of weeks. So they're voting right now to annex us into the future, into their association. And so our residents would have the use of their facilities and pay the dues and be fully integrated. We believe that this development is consistent with the adjacent areas, is one that the town will be proud of, and is a community that will be seamless and harmonious neighbor to the existing neighborhoods within Regency. I don't know how the protocol goes. I'll be over. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
It's not time for that yet, Kurt. At this time, I'll call Mr. Robbie Bell with Bass, Nixon, and Kennedy.
Mayor and Council, my name is Robbie Bell. I reside at 5941 Foreland Drive, Raleigh, North Carolina. A little bit about my background. I started working in the civil engineering field about 42 years ago. During those early years, I worked with several engineering firms while attending North Carolina State University. I obtained 2 engineering degrees, a BS in civil engineering and environmental, and a graduate degree in environmental engineering. I'm registered at PE in North Carolina and Virginia. I've had the opportunity to work on projects across the entire state. However, my main concentration has been here in Wake County. As a matter of fact, several of my first projects in Cary were Applecross, first sections of Scottish Hills, Woodwinds Industrial Park, and the first 2 lanes of Cary Parkway. A little bit about the project description. The proposed subdivision consists of 20 lots on approximately 18.5 acres. The site is located along the north side of Penny Road, bounded on the south by Penny Road, to the west by Killingsworth Drive and Royal Glen Drive, and to the north by Greyfriars Lane, and to the east by Moreland Court. All the adjacent properties along the north side of Penny Road are built-out single-family communities, and this proposed subdivision is consistent with the styles and density of the overall layout of those subdivisions. As discussed, you can see around the subdivision and Windfall, you have an existing sidewalk here, sidewalk over here. We're proposing crossovers. There's sidewalk all up and down the major portion of Penny Road. There's 5-foot sidewalk down at this end. And we're proposing a sidewalk connection here. So in essence, you have a complete loop of a sidewalk here that's either existing or being proposed for our site. We do have a riparian buffer that runs through here and several pockets of wetlands. We considered many times of trying to lay out the project to meet the connectivity, but it just would not work. And on infill, we have found on the infill project where you're surrounded by existing roads, you can't make this 1.2 work. There's no way. So anyway. So simply put, what we're proposing with this plan is virtually identical to the rest of the area. Therefore, I would agree that you will not only find a more harmonious plan for development of this property. It is consistent with the adjacent built environment, provides low density, and provides environmentally sensitive areas. Now jumping over to the minor modifications. As mentioned by Kevin, the plan for development requires the approval of some minor modifications to the town's development standards. The first one is champion trees. A waiver is sought from the town's champion tree regulations, section 7.2.5 of the Land Development Ordinance, as recently amended by the Town Council. The proposed development seeks to remove 2 healthy champion trees. I believe it is important to note that we are saving 7 other healthy champion trees. As can be seen in the materials submitted with the plan, the lots and street network have been designed so as to minimize the impact to environmentally sensitive features on the site. In doing so, the manner in which these 20,000 square foot lots lay out on the site results in 2 champion trees being impacted. First, there's a champion tree located in the low-lying area which needs to contain the stormwater BMP that will serve the site. That BMP is located up in this area, and that is the lowest point, so everything has to drain to that point. And of course, as you know, you cannot put a BMP inside a riparian buffer. The second champion tree will be impacted by the Penny Road and the sidewalk improvements that are being constructed as part of this plan. And it impacts almost more than 50% of that tree. Based upon the existing site constraints, including the low-density zoning and environmental features, the requested modification is the least deviation required to make compliance practicable, and therefore I believe that this minor modification is justified. Second item, street connectivity. A waiver is also sought from the tree connectivity requirements of the Land Development Ordinance, including the provisions of 7.10.3A and the sidewalk connection requirements. 7.10.3A of the Land Development Ordinance contains a mathematical formula that is designed, as the applicant understands it, to measure the strength of the interconnectivity of the site. The mathematical standards require a connectivity rating of 1.2. The proposed low-density single-family community has a 0.5 rating. Again, as I mentioned, any way you strike the road through this site, you cannot meet that 1.2. Also, in several meetings with Department of Transportation, they did not want us to access Penny Road because of the site distance along Penny Road, the curvature. The site's inability to meet this standard is caused by the plan not including a vehicular connection between the two sides of the property. As I discussed previously, the applicant has elected not to connect these two sides of the property because of the environmental features of the site. Considering that this portion of Regency is nearly identical to the rest of the Regency, we believe that it would be irresponsible to impact these sensitive areas solely for the purpose of achieving a mathematical formula that is contained in the LDO. More importantly, we do not believe that a vehicular connection would serve a significant benefit. Only a handful of cars would use this connection as a cut-through. We just do not believe it makes sense to sacrifice the stream buffers in order to make this connection. So based upon the existing site constraints, including the low-density zoning and environmental features, I believe that the requested modification is the least deviation required to make compliance practicable, and that this minor modification is justified. Also, as noted in the staff report, we are asking for minor modifications to the connectivity requirements in the UDO, which require sidewalk connections from the development to Penny Road to Greyfriars Lane. The proposed plan, in fact, requires these conditions. However, because there are no vehicular connection between the internal street and Moreland Court, which would require crossing the stream within the site, the LDO requires that both sides of the plan provide such connections. As noted in the staff report, a pedestrian link between the two sides of this development would require an impact to the stream buffer for the sole purpose of cutting out 1/3 of a mile of walk. We appreciate the staff's desire to get folks over to Regency Greenway in a more direct fashion, but I venture to guess that if the folks living here are willing to walk an additional 1/3 of a mile, they are probably not going to be using the Greenway. So based upon the existing condition constraints, including the low-density zoning and environmental features, the requested modification is the least deviation required to make compliance practicable, and therefore, I believe that this minor modification is justified. Moving on to the CTP modifications. The proposed plan also includes modifications from the Comprehensive Transportation Plan improvements, recommending for Penny Road. The CTP plan calls for Penny Road to be improved as a 4-lane divided highway. As can be seen in the plan materials, the areas within approximately 1 mile of the site on the north side of Penny Road have been built out and have not been improved to this future section. The proposed plan seeks to improve Penny Road consistent with the adjacent built environment, providing seamless roadway and sidewalk connections. If you can envision driving down Penny Road and seeing the road jut out another 10 or 15 feet and then another 10-foot sidewalk, it's going to look quite awkward, and it's just not going to look right going through there. Further, the proposed modification eliminates a conflict with the existing signage located on Killingsworth Drive. If you notice, if you've been through here, Windfall has a very nice entry signage monuments in this area. So in order to widen part of this road, it would wipe out some of their signage. The CTP improvements otherwise required for the site, including a meandering street side trail that exists nowhere else on this stretch of road, would result in this monument sign, as I said, and landscaping being destroyed and relocated, something that the neighbors are going to oppose. Because the proposed plan is consistent with all the properties within the vicinity of the site, I believe that a minor modification from the CTP plan is warranted under these circumstances. Site plan approval standards. With the approval of the minor modifications, the site plan complies with all applicable requirements of this ordinance, including the development and design standards of Chapter 7 and 8, as well as the dedication and improvements provisions of Chapter 8, as well as all applicable town specifications. The improvements contemplated as part of the proposed subdivision and site plan consist of 20 single-family homes on 17.88 acres of land, which results in a community density of 1.19 dwellings per acre. The property is zoned R20, conditional use, which requires a minimum 20,000 square foot lots. Internal streets will consist of public streets, including cul-de-sacs, consistent with the adjacent built environment. The streets have been located so as to minimize impacts to the environmentally sensitive adjacent low-density residential communities. Sidewalks are provided on one side of the roads within the community. And at the request of the staff, a sidewalk connection to Penny Road is being provided from Moreland Court. Finally, the plan has been designed to preserve the existing single-family home on the site, which was built in 1960. As indicated on the proposed plan and other materials submitted with the aforementioned minor modifications, the improvements have been designed in compliance with the requirements of the town's land development ordinance, including the development and design standards of Chapter 7 and 8, as well as the dedication and improvement provisions of Chapter 8. The plan adequately protects other property or residential uses located on the same property from the potential adverse effects of the proposed development. The proposed development is for an integrated single-family community. Further, this large lot single-family community contains the code-required building setbacks, thus ensuring that the homes are located in such a manner as to minimize any potential adverse effect on the residential uses located adjacent to or on the same property. The community will include landscaping as required by the Land Development Ordinance. As a low-density single-family community in the area planned and built for other residential uses, the proposed use has no inherent qualities that would adversely impact adjacent properties. So I believe that the proposed plan adequately protects the other property and residential uses on the subject property from the potential adverse effects of the proposed development. The plan provides harmony and unity with the development of nearby properties. The subject property is surrounded by complementary uses. As previously mentioned, all of the properties adjacent to the site on the north side of Penny Road are existing single-family communities, and this community will be completely in harmony with those communities. Also, while not part of the site plan, it is noteworthy that the community will be part of a larger Regency HOA and will be subjected to their architectural design standards. The site includes lot sizes, pedestrian connections, and road connections entirely in keeping with the existing built environment. As a result, the proposed low-density single-family community will be in harmony and unity of development with the development of the nearby properties. The plan provides safe conditions for pedestrians or motorists and prevents a dangerous arrangement of pedestrian and vehicular ways. The plan includes sufficient sidewalks to ensure no conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians, and the street network has been designed in a manner that will result in vehicular speeds that are conducive to a single-family community. The plan provides safe ingress and egress for emergency services to the site. The plan includes connections to public streets via Moorhead Court, where multiple homes will front, and Royal Glen Drive. The streets internal to the site have been designed so as to ensure that the emergency vehicles have sufficient access to all the residents. As a result, the plan provides safe ingress and egress for emergency services to the site. And I will finish. I know you're bored. Thank you. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Robbie. At this time, I will call Jeff Hokenottle from SEPI Engineering.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Hokenottle. I work for SEPI Engineering. I'm SEPI Engineering's Traffic Engineering Department Manager. I have 15 years experience in traffic engineering. I'm a registered professional engineer in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. Attended NC State undergrad and graduate. I'm going to be talking about traffic this evening. Specifically, the plan provides mitigation for traffic congestion impacts reasonably expected to be generated by the project. The proposed plan, as a 20-lot low-density single-family residential community, generates a de minimis amount of traffic. SEPI Engineering and Construction performed a turning movement traffic count at the intersection of Killingsworth Drive, Tatton Hall Drive, and Penny Road. Using this information, a synchro analysis was completed at the aforementioned intersection during the 2014 AM and PM peak hours following NCDOT and Town of Cary standards and guidelines. All analyzed movements are currently operating at a level service B or better during both peak hours. Assuming a worst-case trip generation scenario with all the projected site trips turning left from Killingsworth Drive onto Penny Road, and a 3% yearly growth rate until the site build-out, all intersection movements are projected to continue to operate at a level service B or better during both analyzed peak hours. During the 2014 PM peak hour, 609 vehicles were counted along Penny Road between the intersections of Killingworth Drive, Tatton Hall Drive, and Ederly Drive. The existing roadway cross-section along the Penny Road property frontage provides adequate capacity for the number of vehicles currently serviced, as well as for the number of vehicles projected for full site build-out. As a result, no capacity mitigation is required due to traffic congestion or traffic trips generated by the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that is all of the witnesses that we have at this time. We'll reserve the opportunity to present rebuttal information to anything the staff presents. And ultimately, again, I believe that the information that you've heard from our witnesses and the evidence that's been presented shows that in addition to a plan that makes sense for the community that's going to be located in, this is a plan that complies with the code's requirements for approval of a site plan, and we respectfully request you all's approval of the same. Thank you.
Thank you. This time I'll invite other speakers who have been sworn in to speak in support of the application to approach the podium one at a time. Anyone to speak in support? Any additional one to speak in support? Seeing no one, I would invite cross-examination of the witnesses who testified in support of the request. Okay. We're now opening the public hearing for those who are opposed to the request, and would invite anyone to speak that's opposed to the request. Okay. This time I'll call on the town staff for any additional testimony.
Thank you, Mayor. As mentioned before, staff has reviewed the applicant's requests for modifications and for approval of the site plan and offers the following professional analysis for council consideration. The applicant's request to reduce the connectivity index from 1.2 required by the LDO to 0.5 is probably reasonable given the surrounding development patterns. Staff concludes that due to the site abutting 3 existing streets in the surrounding neighborhood, town and NCDOT regulations would likely preclude another access, as was testified to by the applicant's expert witness, to Penny Road. The property layout along Greyfriars is a long, thin tail of property here that would preclude another access onto Greyfriar with any reasonable separation from Moreland Court. And it makes sense for the lots proposed in the subdivision to front on existing streets and blend into the subdivision. The only vehicular connection, as was testified to by the applicant's team, that would make any sense would be to tie the cul-de-sac into the existing Moreland Court, which require crossing the stream. Doing so would do nothing but eliminate one of the proposed nodes, bringing the ratio of street segments to street nodes to 1.0, still falling short of the 1.2 required by the LDO. We looked at this in regards to the wider Windfall, Cambridge subdivision layout, did a connectivity index accounting there, and it was like 1.03. And adding this one cul-de-sac in with the 0.5 requested by the applicant lowered it 1/100th of a point to 1.02. So it's really a negligible change if you look at this in a broader perspective as well. We do believe that the LDO requires a pedestrian, well, the LDO does require a pedestrian connection where you modify, or additional pedestrian connections where you modify the connectivity index in a subdivision. Again, looking at the proposed layout, there are 2 possible options. They are providing a pedestrian connection required by Moreland Court. That is required by a separate section of the ordinance, not because of the connectivity index modification. It's because they're proposing a cul-de-sac that backs up to a thoroughfare, so they're required to make that pedestrian connection regardless. And looking at the cul-de-sac where the connectivity index would be waived, there are 2 possibilities. One would be connecting the bulb of the cul-de-sac up to Greyfriars. That does require crossing the stream. The other would be providing some sort of pedestrian connection from the curve of the cul-de-sac down toward the street side trail along Penny Road that would be required. That cuts off very little additional walking distance. If you were in this lot here, you'd start to walk down the cul-de-sac to get there. You'd only be cutting off this small section. Providing a pedestrian connection from the bulb of the cul-de-sac up to Greyfriars would, as the applicant testified, cut off approximately 1/3 of a mile of walking distance. To be fair, there is significant topography, and it's outlined in the staff report, falling from the cul-de-sac approximately 23 feet down to the stream buffer, and then another 18 feet back up, 15 to 18 feet back up to Greyfriars Lane. So it would not be accessible handicap accessible. It would require some sort of stairs. We haven't seen a design, so that's something that they would have to come back and do, because they've to date not offered any kind of additional pedestrian connection from that cul-de-sac out to Greyfriars. At this point, I will turn it over to Jerry Jensen of the Transportation and Facility Design Department to discuss staff's analysis on the modifications requested to the Penny Road frontage.
Good evening, Council. I'd like to briefly go over a few topics about the transportation system that's required for this plan. First of all, I wanted to briefly talk about the existing road section that's out there today. The roadway is basically a 3-lane section with a center turn lane. There is curb and gutter on the south side of the road adjacent to the Danbury subdivision. Along the subject property, there is basically a shoulder and ditch section along that section of roadway. I want to give you a couple perspectives of some photos. This was looking west from the main entrance into the subdivision from Killingsworth Drive. It's basically a 60-foot back-to-back street section with curb and gutter on both sides. It does have, like I say, curb and gutter and sidewalk, and it's basically marked for 4 travel lanes. Looking from the property toward Ederly Drive, the developments that have already been built out previously in this area, again, it's matching up to a 60-foot back-to-back street section with curb and gutter and sidewalk. Given the gap in the roadway, there's generally just stripe for 3 travel lanes, as it's currently right now. I want to talk briefly about the right-of-way dedication. Our CTP requires a dedication of 100 feet that would facilitate a 4-lane median divided roadway with curb and gutter, sidewalk, landscape median, and wide outside lanes, travel lanes for bikes. The applicant proposes a non-standard right-of-way width of 79 feet, of which they would use easements to basically facilitate the construction and installation of any easements or any other utilities that may be needed in the shoulder of the roadway. Staff has several observations I'd like to point out on this. First of all is that the substandard right-of-way width offered by the applicant is insufficient to support the infrastructure like sidewalk, drainage, public utilities, and other private utilities that we generally put in our shoulder sections of our roadway. The proposed width is also insufficient to support future development of the road to the ultimate CTP without the town or NCDOT having to purchase that additional area if we decide to do a future widening project in that area. The easements offered by the applicant may not provide the level of authority guaranteeing the town or NCDOT to dictate other private users in that and uses allowed in those easement areas. Therefore, we feel like a fee simple right-of-way is probably more protective for the town and NCDOT. And finally, as far as an observation, the town staff, in our recent conversations as of today, we're not aware that the applicant has provided a specific proposal to NCDOT to use easements in lieu of right-of-way, so we believe that needs some further evaluation, at least by NCDOT, if they chose, or if this council chooses to allow that option of using easements. Staff has an opinion about the right-of-way issue in that we believe that the development plan has sufficient land area to dedicate right-of-way in accordance with our CTP standard of 1/2 of 100 feet of right-of-way. I want to talk a little bit about the road widening improvements themselves. Our CTP requires a 4-lane median divided roadway, of which they would provide half of that along their roadway frontage, including curb and gutter, sidewalk, and median provision in the roadway. The ultimate width of this roadway is 78-foot back-to-back street section with an 18-foot landscape median, of which they would be required to do half. The applicant proposes to match the roadway that has previously been completed by earlier developments that translates back 20 years ago, which is basically a width of 60-foot back-to-back street section with curb, gutter, and sidewalk already existing. The applicant also proposes not to construct landscape median at this time, per our CTP. Staff has a couple observations we'd like to point out about this plan. The widening proposed by the applicant is not consistent with our CTP. And secondly, the landscape median does have an aesthetic value per our town policies and guidelines. but limited value in managing access along this immediate corridor since there are no existing driveways or intersections that would provide access management into those areas. So it provides no really traffic management benefit. Staff has some opinions or things that you may want to consider tonight going forward. You do have several options. I'll outline 4 options for you, which you may wish to consider regarding the road widening. The first is accept the widening proposal by the applicant to build 60-foot back-to-back street section along their frontage. 2, accept the widening proposal by the applicant, but require a payment in lieu for the unbuilt section of what CTP would have required. Thirdly, require the applicant to build to CTP with the landscape median. And 4th, require the applicant to build to the CTP width without a landscape median, and perhaps accept a payment in lieu for the median section of the roadway. That's all I have to offer tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Sandy Bailey from our Facilities Planning Group, who's going to talk a little bit about our street side trail.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. The street side trails are part of the town's overall greenway network. They're typically 10-foot wide paved trails that run along roads and connect other off-road greenways. They're used by pedestrians and cyclists, as are your typical greenways. The Penny Road Street Side Trail is proposed to extend along Penny Road from the town's eastern jurisdictional boundary to its western boundary, a distance of approximately 3 miles. And along this way, it will link numerous neighborhoods, other public greenways, including Dutchman's Branch and the Camp Branch Greenway. It will link to the Penny Road Elementary School and the park that exists at that site. Also the Activity Center at the intersection with Kildare Farm Road, Oak Grove Elementary, as well as Jack Smith Park on its eastern end. Staff's perspective is that the street side trail is important to this area given the overall connectivity that it will provide for bicyclists and pedestrians, and especially given its close proximity to Penny Road Elementary School and Park, which is approximately 2,000 feet to the east. Sorry, didn't advance the slide. Per the Wake County Public School System website, the subject property and surrounding properties are in the attendance zone for this elementary school and are not within the busing zone, as stated in the staff report. The existing park at the Penny Road Elementary site contains a baseball field, a soccer field, restrooms, a pond, and a playground, and is currently managed by Wake County. Although the town's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan does propose that at some point in the future this become a town facility, and the town and the county have been in negotiations over this in the past. Street side trail construction is required per the town's LDO, and numerous trails have been constructed with new development all across town, even where a street side trail doesn't exist on either side. And that follows the same manner in which roadway improvements are done, as well as utility improvements. And then we'll just also state that if the applicant does not construct the trail and also does not dedicate the easement, that just puts the town in the position of possibly having to purchase easement and fund construction of the trail in the future. One other thing I wanted to just mention was, in talking about whether this trail would blend with what exists on either end, this is just a shot from Google Maps looking west from approximately from Killingsworth Drive. So there's currently a wide swath of grassy area behind the existing sidewalk. Let's see. And this is the other side, looking east from the subject property towards Ederly. So you can see there's also grassed, good-sized grass shoulder behind the sidewalk that exists there. So staff doesn't think that a little bit of additional clearing that would be required for the 10-foot trail as opposed to 5-foot trail would aesthetically be out of character with what exists on either side. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Kevin.
And finally, just to close the loop with the request to remove 2 champion trees from the site. As I mentioned before, of the 10 champion trees identified in excess of 32 inches across the site, they're proposing to remove 2. And the applicant did a pretty good job of outlining their reasoning. Staff does concur with those reasons. Tree 2 is located at the end of the proposed cul-de-sac, which really there's not a lot of room to move that cul-de-sac bulb either east or west and still make it work functionally, as well as the fact that the grade falls off the northern end of the site toward the stream buffer, and the BMP is located at that lowest point of the northern section. So in order to catch the water draining from that drainage basin, the BMP is where it needs to be topographically. The design of the roadway to meet the design criteria for roads and the fact that the BMP is located there does result in the lowering of the finished grade approximately 6 foot below the existing grade. And lowering that much grade around the base of the champion tree, staff does not feel that's a suitable candidate for retention on the site. Tree 9 is very similar, except the fact it's not a BMP that's impacting it, is the widening of Penny Road. The applicant's proposed widening, which is less than the town's required widening, puts that tree just outside the back of curb. So once you grade beyond back of curb to install the utility strip and sidewalk and tie the road grades in with the existing grade, well over 50% of that tree's champion tree's critical root zone has been disturbed, and that's just not a suitable candidate for retention. And then, of course, if town council were to require the full widening, that just makes that much more, that's much more impact to the tree zone. It wouldn't be able to be saved at all. So just to summarize really quickly, and I'll put this back up once council gets to its motion phase of the hearing. They have requested 5 modifications, the first being connectivity index. The LDO requires a connectivity index of 1.2 or better. Applicant has requested an index of 0.5, and staff does observe that is probably reasonable based on surrounding development patterns and the fact that it's surrounded on 3 sides by existing subdivision roads and a thoroughfare to the south. Right-of-way dedication, they are requesting 39.5 feet from the center line, which is half of a 79-foot right-of-way, which ties into the right-of-way on the western side of the property. The LDO requires them to dedicate 50 feet, which is half of a 100-foot right-of-way. And as Mr. Jensen testified, it's insufficient to contain the sidewalk they're proposing, as well as any other quasi-governmental utilities that may need to go in that strip. At a minimum, staff believes that a 5-foot utility strip, the sidewalk, and a 1-foot shoulder beyond the sidewalk should be in the right-of-way if council is inclined to grant a reduction. The third, waiver to road improvements along Penny Road. The LDO requires a 78-foot cross-section. The applicant is proposing 60, the difference being roughly 18 feet or the width of the landscape median. As Mr. Jensen testified, that additional cross-section width is for the landscape median, which has limited transportation value, but does have an aesthetic value per the town's policies. The next request would be the street side trail. LDO requires them to provide a 10-foot street side trail and easement. Applicant is requesting to provide a 5-foot sidewalk in lieu of that and no easement for future installation of a trail. And as Ms. Bailey testified, that street side trail does serve an important multimodal purpose for getting pedestrians and cyclists to nearby recreational facilities and educational facilities. And finally, as we just discussed, the removal of 2 champion trees. They're really not suitable candidates for retention on the site given the other constraints they're dealing with. So that concludes staff's presentation at this point, and I'll turn it over to council for deliberation. Thank you.
This time I'll invite cross-examination of town's witnesses. No? Okay. We'll ask if anyone sworn in has any objections to incompetent evidence or testimony. All right. Either party believe that new evidence has been presented tonight that warrants a continuance of this hearing?
Mr. Mayor, not a continuance, but I would like to respond at some point to 2 of the things that the staff brought up during their presentation. So whatever is the appropriate time to do so, and it won't be lengthy, I promise.
Mr. Silverstein, would that be appropriate during our deliberation or before?
It would be appropriate to do it before because the staff did bring up additional information that was not addressed in their original presentation, and Mr. Barron has the right to respond to that.
Okay, very well.
And I just want to make 2 points. One, with respect to conveying easements as opposed to dedicating right-of-way to facilitate utilities and things of that nature, we have the ability to convey to the town essentially all of the rights that they would get with a dedication. Conveyance of an easement for right-of-way purposes or for utility purposes, for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much the same thing as a dedication anyway. So we have the ability to give the town whatever protection they need to ensure that they can locate in that easement area the utilities and other things that they would need to locate in that area. And then second, with respect to the street side trail discussion, we don't dispute the incredible value associated with having street side trails for bicyclists and pedestrians, and we also don't dispute the fact we're really close to a school. However, achieving a 10-foot wide section here for the benefit of those people is only good for the frontage of our property, because once you leave our site, you're back down to a 5-foot sidewalk. So again, we just don't think, given the existing built environment, it's reasonable to require something that is not already included in what is an existing built environment and is not going anywhere anytime soon. So those are the only 2 points that I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Very good. This time, I'll open the deliberative phase of the hearing and ask council members for questions or comments. Ms. Robinson.
I have a question about what the streetscape would look like if we required the full 78-foot with the median to be constructed. How disjointed would it appear and be, and how many lanes would actually be right there? Like, are we still talking about like 3 lanes, or it would become 2 lanes with a wide median?
I believe from our estimates, that there would be a bump out of probably about 9 feet. So that'd be probably 9 feet of travel way that wouldn't, be used at this point in time for any specific travel purpose.
And then it would have a wide median, and then it would have just 1 lane in each direction?
Well, we could still get 2 lanes in each direction. The median probably couldn't be to its ultimate width, which is normally 18 feet. It'd probably have to be more in lines of probably what the center turn lane is now, which is about 11 feet. So it wouldn't be to a full CTP. Just because we have to transition, we're transitioning from smaller section roadways on each side. We have to transition into that. So we would never probably realize our full 18 feet in that area.
Okay, so it'd be 11-foot median, and how many lanes would be on either side of this? You said there'd be 2 lanes on either side of this median in this section. Is that correct?
Right. We currently on both bookends of this, we have a 60-foot back-to-back street section, which could facilitate a 5-lane undivided section. Those lanes would be 11 feet in width, or we could, in practicality, could do 4 travel lanes instead of a center turn lane. But I think from a safety perspective, I think probably center turn lane would be better, even though the lane widths themselves would be not 12 feet, but they'd be 11 feet.
Excuse me for a minute. While you're explaining that, is there a better slide we can look at for the sake of the folks that are watching this?
And us.
Probably towards Ederly.
I think you're bringing up some good points, and I think
This is the photo taking as you're looking east towards Ederly Drive. Right now, currently, it's a 3-lane section with a common center turn lane, and then on the north side of the roadway, there's an extra lane there that just really has not been used for any purpose because it doesn't continue forward through this property. So it just dead ends there right now.
But if what is being proposed by the applicant is constructed, this existing curb that we're looking here, roadway width, sidewalk, would all be consistent with what's on the screen, correct?
That is correct. It would match.
If we required them to widen to current CTP standards, we would see, you said a 9-foot bump in?
We would transition outward probably about 9 feet. Is my estimate of probably what that would affect. So you'd have about 9 feet of unused area.
Okay. And even if they did widen to CTP standards, we still would not change this section of road from 1 lane each direction to 2 lanes each direction.
Well, there's still a lot of gaps that aren't built out yet, particularly as you go further to the west. It's still a 3-lane section. So somehow in this area, we're still going to have to, until the full roadway corridor is built to some level of ultimate section, we're still going to end up having to transition back to a 3-lane section after you get past this development and heading west.
Okay.
While you have this picture up regarding the sidewalk, does the town have any plans to do anything with the existing sidewalk toward the school to try to match up? I don't know if there's any sidewalk plans or
As far as retrofitting that for a street side trail, I don't believe we have. I'll let Sandy talk about that.
No, that is not currently budgeted.
is it planned? I know there are things not budgeted, but planned.
Right. No, we haven't up to this point planned that.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
I have a question with regards, Mr. Bell was speaking to the sidewalk around the area. I just want to make sure I understand where those sidewalks are in plan.
Robbie, yell at me if I get this wrong, but there's an existing sidewalk on the western side of Killingsworth Drive. It crosses over to the western side of Royal Glen, crosses over this side street, goes up here. It is on the southern side of Greyfriars. I know it is at Moreland. I'm assuming, I can't see because of the shadow, but I assume it continues going up Greyfriars and it crosses over Moreland and continues that way. They are proposing as part of this development to provide sidewalk. There's no sidewalk on Moreland Drive or Moreland Court currently. They're proposing sidewalk with this development along the western side around the bulb and then down out to Penny Road. There's no existing sidewalk along Penny Road at the moment.
And there's a piece of property that looks uninhabited, that piece of pie at the bottom. Is there a home there?
This one?
Mm-hmm.
It does not appear to me.
Okay. So there's several connections through. There's a connection through from Moreland to Penny Road. There's a connection basically in the center that you spoke to that might have a topography issue that might need steps or something like that. Is that correct? From near where the house is over the stream buffer?
Well, there are no proposed connections in the center. The applicant is proposing not to make any connections through the center. So looking at the proposed layout, there will be sidewalk along Killingsworth. That won't change. Sidewalk along Royal Glen, Greyfriars. They are adding sidewalk here to go out to Penny Road. There will be sidewalk or multi-use trail, depending on what council decides, along Penny Road. There will be sidewalk along one side, the southern side of the cul-de-sac to tie out to the sidewalk here and then cross over Killingsworth to get to the main sidewalk.
I thought you showed a slide with some sort of connection from the center of that cul-de-sac out to Greyfriar.
That was staff's analysis, simply indicating that the LDO requires an additional pedestrian connection to be made.
Right.
Of the 2 points that would be possible, the one that makes the most sense functionality, whether or not its constructability makes the most sense, would be from the end of the cul-de-sac out to Greyfriars.
So that is a proposal by staff? Okay, it was just staff
Right.
suggestion.
There's a sanitary sewer easement that runs generally along that corridor. It's outlined here in the dashed green line. There may be opportunity for portions of that trail to coexist with that easement to limit additional disturbance. As long as it's not a structure, it could be located in the easement. So.
Okay, thank you.
Based on the topography, you said that's not going to be handicap accessible.
It would not be accessible.
20 feet difference.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize for interrupting. The hearing has reached the 1 hour time limit.
Thank you. Proceed.
Okay.
Thank you. No, those are my questions. Thank you.
So I guess my one real question I'm still not clear on is, the applicant says we have the ability to give the town whatever they need in regarding the easements and such, but there seems to be, we're getting right-of-way, we're getting easements. I mean, what prohibits the applicant's proposal from allowing the town to have the necessary infrastructure or access to it, given that it's in harmonious with everything else up and down the street? That's what I'm kind of not
I believe they could. The easement document they would have to probably secure with the town would give the town the first rights to refuse anything else in that easement. Without that sort of latitude, then there could be other users within that easement, which could include private utilities, gas, electric, telecom, that may prevent us to maintain those facilities without encumbering maybe some of those private utilities. So I think it could work. But again, I think it's just simpler if we have right-of-way that's fee simple, that we have, either us or NCDOT has ultimate authority over what encroachments we grant in that area. So it just gives us a little bit greater latitude, I think, but technically it could be done.
It could be done via easements, or it could be done via right-of-way dedication?
Either.
Either.
Okay.
I think from a legal standpoint, we would have concerns about the easement document. And, we could probably draft something today that thinks about the current use of right-of-ways today, but projecting into the future, can we envision what might be in the right-of-way in the future and exactly how we'd need to write an easement document to account for things that people want to put in the right-of-way 30 years from now? I'm not sure we could do that. So we're more comfortable from a legal standpoint with a full right-of-way dedication, and of course, that's what's normally required under the LDO.
Can the applicant help me better understand why they would prefer not to dedicate the right-of-way?
While they're talking, I'll just say to staff, in the future, it might be very helpful for the council if you could show us what the cross-section would look like, touching on its bordering properties, and give us all of the options, because sometimes it's hard for us to extrapolate what exactly that would look like with 9 feet and being disjointed or connected.
Where I'm, I really appreciate the applicant's plan and their efforts to stay in harmony with the existing community. But at the same time, I do understand the town's concerns regarding future improvements, widenings and such, that we might need that right away. So I'm kind of, how do we both get what we're looking for and protect the character and charm of the existing built environment, which, that's something we always hear about. We always hate the little cutout roads, little sections and all that. But it is that future unknown that I'm just a little unclear with.
And I think as Mr. Jensen was describing earlier, he presented sort of 4 options. Even if the full right-of-way width is dedicated, that doesn't mean you have to require them to build out the full future section. So,
Mr. Barron.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to, we're digesting the conversation and the comments. Ultimately, the reticence that the developer has to dedicating rather than doing it via easement is that it pushes everything back 5 feet. So it reduces lot sizes ultimately, and has the potential, and we're not at the stormwater engineering phase, but the BMP, this is the low side of the property. We can't locate it in the buffer portion around the stream. This is where the BMP needs to be located. Our concern is if there's an additional 5 feet that is essentially taken for the right-of-way, it pushes us back 50 feet, and then we're here, and we're not 100% certain that we would be able to locate our BMP within that area. So again, we believe we can adequately protect the town. I appreciate the town legal's perspective that we don't know what future right-of-way would be used for, and we completely agree with that. If it's you all's prerogative to demand it, I think my client will acquiesce to that. We'll try to make it work. Just under the circumstances, our reticence is making sure that we can get 20 large lots on the site and still provide stormwater detention and treatment on the site in that BMP location.
Okay.
And I will add, if I may, due to council's recent adoption of the revised champion tree ordinance, if the concern is saving, is the loss of the BMP, it is a bioretention area. It could be located now in the streetscape if they're showing that they're saving other significant trees. And lots 19 and 20 do have 3 or 4 champion trees on them, and they've actually redesigned the site to save an additional one of those, which they were originally proposing to remove. But that may be another option, is if council chooses to have them dedicate the entire right-of-way, looking at relocating that or keeping that BMP in the street.
So they could rededicate, or they could dedicate the entire right-of-way, but we could allow the BMP to encroach into the buffer.
Correct, because it is a bioretention area, which is what's currently proposed, it would be allowed to stay in the streetscape.
That was the one thing I hated about that ordinance.
There's a challenge.
Other questions?
But, I mean, I think it's a wonderful plan. I really do. I mean, I don't know that we've gotten something that's so harmonious with adjacent neighborhoods and stuff in a long time. Lot sizes are phenomenal. When's the last time we saw a 40,000 square foot lot? I mean, it's phenomenal. I think this would do nothing but help the existing community and be a benefit to it. Cul-de-sacs, I mean, the connectivity is not an issue for me. It doesn't seem to be an issue with staff. I think their word was reasonable. Sidewalks, I'm not going to push for a 10-foot wide sidewalk that goes back into a 5-foot sidewalk. The right-of-way, I think, is the one thing that just, you know, if I had a legal document or something that I could look at, or for the easement that maybe was proposed, then maybe that would help me ease some of my concerns, but kind of leaning towards a right-of-way, and then, dang it, I hate to put a BMP in a buffer.
I agree with almost everything that you've said. I mean, I am fine waiving the trees and fine waiving the connectivity. I'd like to have the 100-foot right-of-way dedicated, and I'd like them to match the existing street and sidewalk, but I'd like to see them contribute a payment in lieu for the balance, for the difference of costs, so that we have those funds available someday if that road gets widened out. And I think that's far, far away.
I'm not so
I don't
concerned.
know how long they can hold those funds. Like, are there any rules that the road has to be done within a certain time frame if we receive a payment in lieu?
It's my understanding is once they make it a payment in lieu, we can use when and whenever we want to use those funds for. So I don't think there's any obligation on our part to build anything.
To do anything quickly, okay.
Any other comments?
The right-of-way, I guess, to me is more of a concern than the payment in lieu, because the reality is until this road is punched to, 4 lanes, the median's never happening.
I agree.
So that's not so much a concern to me. The right-of-way, I guess, is the biggie for me.
That would be my priority too if I had to rank them.
Second.
I would say that, you look at what's required and you look at practicality, and a multi-use trail sounds so great until you realize there's only 10 feet of it. And then it connects to 5-foot sidewalks. So it's just not practical, I think, to require them to do that. I think just as Jennifer went through the 5 things, I think they've done a great job, thank you, Jennifer, with the champion tree saving the ones they're able to. I think the connectivity has been proven that this would be okay. And for me, like with Don, it really is just dedication of the right-of-way, because we can't predict the future. And if they're willing to give on that, I think they will get something that looks really terrific out there and will make, the fact that their neighbors want to subsume them into their homeowners association speaks volumes to what a good job this will do out there.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, it's really, just for my clarification, the champion tree ordinance that we now have really doesn't apply to this, correct? I mean, my memory was, I thought if we had a situation like on 2 and 9 that it just doesn't make sense to save, I thought we had an option where in lieu of removing that, because it's just illogical to keep it, you had some plantings elsewhere. Am I missing something here, or should there not be that requirement?
Absent all other modifications being requested and everything else going on, if this plan were to be reviewed by staff, the champion tree ordinance you just adopted would allow those 2 trees to be removed and replaced administratively. It says if it's affected by required road widening, or if it's affected by a BMP that's in a topographically appropriate location, that staff can approve that removal. It does not get them out of the replacement requirements. So they are removing these 2 trees and they are replacing those 2 trees. They are meeting the requirements in regards to that, so I didn't cover that in the presentation. Does that clarify that? The reason council's being asked to decide that is because once the plan goes to council, everything they're asking for has to be decided by council.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yep.
Other questions? Mr. Yoha?
Yeah, I'm
more than okay with the connectivity modification. I'm happy with the connectivity modification, to be honest with you. I'm regrettably okay with the trees. My real concern with this, when we first saw it at the rezoning, was that it would be harmonious with the surrounding development, instead of being seen as something from an outside builder coming in and building something in the middle of three sides of this beautiful neighborhood. And I'm pleased that it's taken the turn that it has. I really am. And I like to see things as consistent, so I'm good with the sidewalk. And although I respect the whole trail idea that we have, I mean, but it's not in this case. And as far as the construction of the road, right now it kind of bumps out. If they did what we wanted to do, it would bump in, I guess, is the, I don't know, it's the way I look at it, right?
It will bump in into the streetscape.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'd be fine with it staying straight right where it is. As far as the dedication of the right-of-way, that, again, I'm a little confused about myself. And, I mean, if the staff really thinks that's critical, I think maybe we should take some kind of stand there. But otherwise, I'm fine.
Well, again, for clarification, if we would insist on that, that easement and the concern that Mr. Barron brought up about the 5-foot lot, did I hear correctly that we can still make accommodations so that the BMP can encroach and we don't affect any other trees?
That's right.
So then, you know, looking at that, I guess I'm having a hard time seeing where that 5-foot encroachment would affect much on 20, would do very little on, I can't read those small numbers, the one on the left, and
S4.
you know, I guess the question I'm just thinking out loud is how much of a hardship is it really?
Right.
We asked that. So
That's a judgment call.
yeah. So I'd like to hear
On
what.
that 5-foot lot.
Yeah.
And there are some other options available if you were to require the full right-of-way dedication. Normally, it would just push the entire streetscape further north into the site. However, which would of course shorten lots 2, 3, 4, make them a little wider, and lot 20 would hardly be affected. However, they could look at averaging the streetscape if they needed to pick up. They could use some of that additional open space to make up that additional 5-foot encroachment area. It would just be considered streetscape. So there are some other options out there that could possibly ameliorate some of their concerns in regards to how that affects the site.
And still look harmonious with the surrounding neighborhoods.
Well, the dedication of the right-of-way doesn't affect the appearance. It's the actual physical improvements that would affect the appearance, with the exception of the entry monument on the corner.
If council is ready, we can close the public comment portion and ask Mr. Hells to lead us through a motion. Are we there
Do you
yet?
have any more comments from the applicant?
Kevin, can you put up slide 36? I think as we look at a motion, I thought that was the most helpful.
Yes, when you get to your motions, I was going to bring that one back.
Oh, well, I see. I'm just reading your mind.
Sorry, I'm trying to eliminate confusion. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of it, though. I think what I heard from staff was that if we dedicate the full right-of-way, we have the opportunity, I believe, Kevin, to average the right-of-way to 50 feet. Is that correct?
Not average the right-of-way, average the streetscape.
Average the streetscape.
You can average the streetscape.
Okay. Okay.
Can't reduce it anywhere less than 30 feet.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with that, as I understand it from my client, and we're comfortable dedicating the full amount of right-of-way.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
if we're done with comments and questions, we can close the comment portion of the meeting, and we'll do so at this time and ask Mr. Hells to help us with the motions.
And normally I would pop up the approval criteria for modifications, but this one has a number of different approval criteria from different sections of the ordinance, so I'll refer to your worksheet in regards to the approval criteria for each minor modification. I believe we would still want you to make a motion on the right-of-way dedication. The applicant has committed to providing it, but since the site plan shows it reduced, I would say deny that minor modification and approve it with their proposed condition. Would you agree with that?
Do we have to, in our motion, do we have to list them by the modification request numbers, or can we name?
Just name them.
You can name them if you like.
Good, I should make sure.
Would you like to give it a
Lord.
try?
Sure, I'll give it a go.
Unless we're waiting on
give it a try.
further
Okay.
information?
Yeah, no,
before
let
we
me go
make
ahead
this
and,
motion?
no, let me go ahead and make the motion. For the reasons discussed prior, I move that we approve the modification request to, for connectivity index, for road improvements, for the street side trail, and for the champion tree removal.
Second.
Where, is that
Oh.
just part of the motion?
That was part of the, first part of the motion?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, there's
Oh,
no part
we're
I have
not
to
doing them
add.
individually? Oh, the first part of the
That's the first part of
worksheet.
your second.
Got
I'm
it.
sorry, and I hope I'm doing this right, but, and these requests made by the applicant, with the exception of the right-of-way dedication, requiring them to make a right-of-way dedication.
And that's what we were just clarifying. I'll let Mr. Barron say he agrees after I say this, but they have withdrawn their request for that modification on the right-of-way dedication only. So it's the second one on the table here. I think it was modification number 2 in the
we don't
worksheet.
even
So
have
that
to
is
talk about it?
withdrawn. So you don't even need to talk about it because they've withdrawn it.
So we're in the
Yes.
middle of making a
Yes.
motion, and we have a motion on the 4
I think I
items.
need to, yeah, I think I need to amend it or restate it.
All right, we're gonna
Okay,
restate
so
the
for the reasons priorly discussed, I move that we approve the modification request by the applicant for the connectivity index, for the road improvements, for the street side trail, and for the champion tree removal.
There's a motion
Second.
and a second. Discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Silverstein, if everything's in order,
You need to make a motion on the site
We
plan.
have to-
oops,
For the reasons discussed, I move that we approve the proposed subdivision plans with the minor modifications as approved by council.
Second.
there's a motion, second. Discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Silverstein, everything in order?
It would now be appropriate to close the public hearing.
Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing and thank Mr. Hales for guiding us through.
We could go on.
Our next quasi-judicial public hearing is for Garden Supply Company's site plan. An overview of the hearing procedures, detailed rules are attached on the printed agenda. All speakers who want to speak during this public hearing must be administered an oath by Mrs. Johnson, who is sitting to my right, and we'll pause just a moment to allow those individuals who would like to speak at the public hearing to approach Mrs. Johnson and receive their oaths. The council will pause at this time and wait till that has been completed. How you doing? I guess I'm like a worried mother hen.
I got everybody asking me. It was so sweet. Jeannie called me at like 4:30. And she goes, just wanted to see if you need anything for the council meeting. What can we do to make you comfortable? And lazy boy, little drinks with umbrellas. Can't make that happen. Whatever. But it's like, everywhere I'm going, it's, are you okay? You okay? You okay? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I'm high as a kite. I feel great.
This time, I'll ask council members, actually, we're minus one council member. Actually, we're minus 2 council members. I'll stay paused until we get 2 council members back. Then we'll ask council.
Start at that end.
Ooh, my friend.
Let's hope so.
Yourself.
I think she's coming. This time, I'll ask council members if they've had any site visits, ex parte communications, financial relationships, special knowledge, or close relationship to an affected person to disclose. And I'll start on my right this time and ask Ms. Hadcock.
I'm sorry I held you up, Mayor. None.
None?
None.
Ms. Robinson?
None.
Ms. Smith? Copy none. Mr. Branch?
Very familiar with the site, drive by it often. It's not far from my place of business, so I drive a lot of cars, so drive on a lot of roads and happen to go by this one quite often. I also do know the applicant on a professional level. He has been a customer of ours over the years, as have we been a customer of theirs.
Do you think what you've disclosed will impact your
No.
decision?
I voted against friends before.
Ms. Bush?
None.
Mr. Yerhoff?
No, sir.
Okay. And based on the disclosures we've heard from our council members, I would invite anyone to the podium who has been sworn in to speak if you have an objection to a council member's participation in this hearing. Seeing no one, I'll continue, and I'll open the quasi-judicial public hearing and once again invite Mr. Hales of our staff to introduce this hearing.
Thank you. As you've indicated, the next item on tonight's agenda is a request by Kimley Horn and Associates for modifications to the existing business garden supply company located at 1421 Old Apex Road. The project is located on the southern side of Old Apex Road, located to the east of an existing Town of Cary water tank, and the property located farther to the east beyond this property is a vacant piece of property. It's an old residential house run down. Again, the site is located on a future C-Tran route. I'm not aware of any plans by the town to expand that route anytime in the foreseeable future. Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan does show a proposed greenway that runs off this property, but adjacent to, so I thought it was germane to discuss briefly. On the Town of Cary's water tank site, it crosses Old Apex Road and then runs north-south into the communities either side. Property is currently zoned Office Research and Development. Conditional use has been since 1996, I believe. The conditions on the property restrict the use to a wholesale/retail garden center and require a 30-foot undisturbed streetscape or buffer, as it was termed back in the 90s, along Old Apex Road. Subject property is already developed as a garden center, as Mr. France already alluded to. Building is located at the far western end of the site, parking located in the middle, and as you go toward the northeast, it's used for a lot of bulk storage, equipment, other non-customer related uses. This existing storage building on the site, in addition, it's proposed to remain as is located currently. You can see the parking striped from the island in the foreground of the picture. That parking doesn't appear on the site plan we have on file, but that parking is being added with the proposed plan tonight, in addition to wheel stops and some additional striping to better define that area for more customer use. And looking past the storage building, which is on the right-hand side of this photo, down toward the messier end of the site, if you will, it's used for bulk storage, overflow plant storage. You can see equipment in the background using for some of the wholesale operations and landscape service operations. There's an old wooden dumpster enclosure located on the left-hand side of the photo, which is in a state of disrepair. That will be relocated elsewhere on the site, in addition to the bulk storage bins you see there with topsoil and mulch products. So basically, they've requested to reorganize the eastern end of the site to provide some additional parking for customers. It requires the addition of some additional landscape islands to meet current landscape requirements. Those are shown here in dark green. 14 spaces to about right here, that's 13 spaces to right there, are existing, and then basically those will be redefining that site with dumpster area, and bulk storage you saw in the earlier photo is located in this area, which they'll be redefining for parking, put in wheel stops and a landscape island to meet the tree requirements. The striped parking you saw in 2 pictures ago is right here. They'll be providing additional thermoplastic pavement striping and some wheel stops to better define that area, kind of keep the equipment from running over and just using it as a general purpose area, which is kind of what's happening now. One of the downfalls of the existing site, if anybody's been there, has noticed there is some existing parking that's occurring out on Old Apex Road. And while there is sidewalk along the Old Apex Road frontage to a point approximately halfway along the frontage. There is no pedestrian access from the site out to that sidewalk. There are some retaining walls and some berms located toward the western end of the site. And then it's pretty heavily wooded as you move to the east. And so patrons and or employees are having to walk in the travel aisle to get into the site if they're having to park out on Old Apex or if they're walking to the garden center. So one of the things they're proposing is reorganizing some of the handicap parking here and providing a new pedestrian connection out to that sidewalk to alleviate that concern. This site does also include a pair of modifications to the town's development ordinances, which is why it is before council tonight. Both of them require council action. The first is a reduction to the 20-foot type C buffer along the southern property line, and the second is another modification to required right-of-way dedication. So the applicant is requesting to reduce the 20-foot type C buffer, which is an aesthetic buffer required by the LDO, along the southern property line between this use and the adjacent right-of-way for the railroad tracks of what that use is, from 20 feet to 10 feet. And the second modification they're requesting is a right-of-way reduction. The CTP requires a 91-foot right-of-way, so they will be responsible for their half, which would be 45.5 feet. However, when this property was developed in the mid-90s, Old Apex Road was widened to its current condition, which is 1/2 of a 90-feet right-of-way. That was dedicated, so 45 feet, resulting in approximately 6 inches of additional right-of-way that would be required. And the applicant is requesting that town council waive that additional 6 inches of right-of-way dedication.
That's a tough one.
That concludes staff's introduction, and we will have additional analysis following the applicant's presentation and any other speakers that present. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We'll call on the applicant's attorney to present arguments and evidence in support of the application by addressing applicable approval criteria.
Thank you, Kevin. My name is Isabel Maddox, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm representing Keith Ramsey and K&D Ramsey LLC, the owner of the property, operator of the Garden Supply Company. Also here with me tonight are my development team, Richard Brown, landscape architect, Mike Horn, PE, and Bethany Ray, all of Kimley Horn. Did you need my address too, for the record? Okay. Ours is a fairly simple request. The reason we're here, there are 2 modifications that we need. One is to permit the reduction of the buffer along the railroad tracks. We, a garden center with lots of plants, have to buffer the railroad tracks. So we want to reduce that from a 20-foot type C buffer to a 10-foot semi-opaque buffer, which is a more heavily landscaped buffer. The second is to waive the requirement for those 6 inches of right-of-way. We did what was required a number of years ago. The CTP has increased it to 91 feet, so we have to do another our half of that, which was these 6 inches. And then finally, the request is to approve the site plan. So those are our 3 requests tonight. And first, I would like to call as my first witness Keith Ramsey, the owner of this property.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name's Keith Ramsey. I reside across the street at 1412 Old Apex Road. My wife and I own K&D Ramsey LLC and operate Garden Supply Company on the site. We've been there for 18 years, and through those 18 years, feel like we've been a plus to the town. We always try to give back to the town, and we've lived pretty harmoniously with neighbors. We get along great with the neighboring subdivisions and neighbors around the area. So I feel like we're an asset to the neighborhood, and like we said, I always seem to be $1 short or missing 6 inches. So we're not asking for a lot here. When we bought the garden center, we actually had a 10-foot buffer, and when we added some greenhouse space, it was reduced back down too. So to create this, it's that site is so long and narrow. To create the space that we need and to kind of reorganize and make it look aesthetically pleasing and more functional, I think this will go a long ways. You know, we live there and we operate a business there, and we really plan on continuing to do that for a long time. So this will go a long ways in maintaining our status there and not having to look for another site or do something different. So we're excited about it. Thank you.
Mr. Ramsey, a couple questions. Do you intend to disturb land area of more than 12,000 feet?
No.
And do you intend to maintain this business in essentially the way you've been maintaining
Yes.
it? No particular expansion is planned here?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Our next witness, I would call Richard Brown, landscape architect.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Richard Brown with Kimley Horn and Associates, 3001 Weston Parkway. I am a licensed landscape architect, again with Kimley Horn, with a BLA from Clemson University, 2005. Since then, I've practiced landscape architecture in the design and engineering role, and in the last 8 years in particular, have practiced landscape architecture in the town of Cary and the Triangle area, working and consulting with Cary Planning and Engineering on multiple different projects during that time. In my involvement with and review of the proposed site plan, we have also visited the site, reviewed the land development ordinance, and I'm here to testify particularly about the landscaping, the buffers, and the satisfaction of the relative LDO requirements. In my professional opinion, the proposed site plan application meets all of the applicable requirements of the LDO, including Chapter 7 and 8, with the exception of the two exceptions that were mentioned, and the applicant is requesting those modifications to the town's development standards. First of which is to reduce the required buffer width along the adjacent railroad corridor. With respect to that item or that request, which is the reduction to the perimeter buffer within the adjacent railroad right-of-way, the applicant requests that 20 feet type C aesthetic buffer along the railroad right-of-way be reduced to 10-foot type B semi-opaque. The package I believe you have before you, you can see that the site is pretty narrowly shaped. We'll try to navigate as I go here. Need about 6 more inches of right-of-way and mouse length here. Okay, along this edge of the site in particular, the site is very narrowly shaped, and that's where essentially the improvements are being made. And as was mentioned by staff, you have existing buildings, parking circulation, and we're sandwiched between an existing 30-foot buffer on the Old Apex Road right-of-way and an existing 10-foot buffer along that rail corridor. Another point is the requirement to maintain that 20-foot buffer would make it difficult to operate the site and to use that critical land area to meet those buffer requirements against the rail right-of-way. You may be able to see from the aerial that's up on your screen along here, there's an existing mature vegetation along there, and as indicated here by site photos that we've taken, there's an existing 8-foot solid wood fence along the large portion of the site from the northern corner all the way down to approximately this location. It should be noted that the development plan for the property 97 SP-037 also included this buffer on the eastern half of the site, and the requested reduction along the rail right-of-way is consistent with those prior approvals. If I can, we would like to request to enter Exhibits A and B, A being the aerial that we have up on the screen. As well as Exhibit B, which will be the site plan the landscape plan, sorry, thank you, that better defines the buffer standard that we're proposing to enhance.
And Rich, would you say that the shape of the property creates a hardship for this property owner?
It does.
And would the proposed landscape requirement standard be increased with the smaller buffer, the narrower buffer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it would.
So that would result in heavier landscaping.
That's correct. So relative to the Exhibit B, which is up here on the screen now, you can see that I wanted to just point out two quick things here. We have as staff indicated, we have an existing 10-foot buffer that is required to meet a Type C aesthetic buffer, and it includes a fence, a solid fence along the property line up to this point here with existing mature vegetation that's shown here. We, on the landscape plan, are proposing to enhance that buffer with additional plantings. These represent the existing mature trees that show up on exhibit, the aerial exhibit images, and we have additional plantings that will be required in addition to the extension of the solid panel fence all the way to the far left property line. These improvements that I mentioned will improve the performance standard of that Type C buffer to a Type B, which is essentially opaque with the addition of the fence and meets that requirement. And in my opinion, the proposed 10-foot buffer with that increased performance standard will provide a better aesthetic screening performance than exists today and will adequately delineate the adjoining railroad right-of-way. With regard to the second request to waive the right-of-way dedication on Old Apex Road, I'll make just a couple of brief points relative to on-site issues. And in my opinion, based on the available survey documentation and information that I've been able to review, that dedication would have a negative impact on the existing stone wall that's just behind the public sidewalk within the right-of-way. The face of that wall is essentially abutting the current right-of-way. Additionally, it would have a negative impact on the required 30-foot buffer plus the 5-foot parking setback from that buffer for a total of 35 feet. Essentially, I'll point you to this zone here where we are currently just meeting or infringing on that 5-foot setback. So pushing the right-of-way another half a foot would only take that out of compliance in that way. So I'll speak real quickly to a few of the site plan standards, and the first of which is, does the plan comply with all applicable requirements of the Land Development Ordinance, including the development and design standards of Chapter 7 and 8, as well as the dedication and improvements provisions of Chapter 8, as well as all applicable town specifications. And the proposed plan, in my opinion, does comply with the applicable requirements of the Land Development Ordinance. Secondly, does the plan adequately protect other properties and residential uses located on the same property from potential adverse effects of the proposed development. Just a few points there. There are no residential uses on or immediately adjacent to the property. The proposed plan does protect adjacent non-residential properties to the north and south through the use of natural perimeter buffers that are at least 10 foot in depth on each the north and south end. And the property, of course, is flanked on the west and east by a public right-of-way of Old Apex Road and the rail right-of-way to the east. The site includes a 30-foot buffer along Old Apex Road here, a 10-foot buffer along the railway, and 10-foot buffers along each the north and south property lines. And we've introduced the landscape plan and the aerial to confirm the buffers and the fence, and propose semi-opaque buffers that adequately screen these other properties from any potential negative impacts, and based on these points, it does meet that site plan standard. Lastly, does the plan provide harmony and unity with the development of nearby properties? The use of the site as a wholesale retail gardening center is existing and has been for many years. The site has been and will remain compatible with the adjacent properties for the reasons previously mentioned to the north and south. And the plan does adhere to all the land use and zoning conditions in the previous site approvals. And as a result, the plan does provide harmony and unity with the development of nearby properties. Ms. Maddox, I believe the last thing, there were 18. There were some comments that are still in process currently with staff with this development, and we wanted to make sure we provided those.
Yes,
as well.
and as to that point, in your package, I'm sure you saw a comment about the overall site plan, that there were still 18 comments outstanding. In fact, those have all been responded to, I think, effectively. The only comments that were not resolved relate to this buffer that we're requesting a modification on, and the right-of-way dedication. And there was a point about parking in there that has been resolved with staff. They calculated parking in a different way, so that is not an issue anymore, and that Mr. Hales can confirm that. So that's what those comment sheets that Richard just handed out. Next, I would like to call Mike Horn to speak with you just briefly about the transportation aspects of this plan.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Mike Horn. I'm with Kimley Horn and Associates, 3001 Weston Parkway, here in Cary, 27513. I am a registered engineer in the state of North Carolina, having now practiced traffic engineering for over 30 years. Oh, into the microphone. I'll address the last three findings that you have, and I'll go quickly. So the last, or number 4, does the plan provide safe conditions for pedestrians or motorists and prevent a dangerous arrangement of pedestrian and vehicular ways? I have visited the site and have reviewed the site driveway of the Garden Supply Company in Old Apex Road. Old Apex Road is a 2-lane roadway with a middle turn lane to allow left turns from Old Apex Road into the site. Based upon my review of the traffic operations of this intersection, it is operating safely today. With the addition of on-site parking and the new pedestrian connection, this intersection will continue to operate safely. Number 5, does the plan provide safe ingress and egress for emergency services to the site? The site driveway is not changing. It will continue to provide safe ingress and egress for emergency services. Number 6, does the plan provide mitigation for traffic congestion impacts reasonably expected to be generated by the project? The proposed plan is not increasing the square footage of the building, and therefore is not increasing traffic. The addition of on-site parking And the pedestrian connection, though, will enhance the traffic operations for the site. So I'm completed. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. You want me to address?
Oh, yeah, actually, that one question. Mr. Horn, can you tell us if the town, excuse me, the town were to want to construct that 91-foot wide right-of-way, could it be constructed within the existing dedicated right-of-way to the ultimate section?
Could the ultimate section be constructed within the 90 feet of right-of-way that is out there today? Yes.
Sorry, I didn't ask that very well.
We knew where you're going.
Yeah. Okay, that's all.
Well, I'd also say, if the 6 inches were dedicated, that would put a portion of the wall within the right-of-way. NCDOT policy would not allow the wall in the right-of-way. Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our evidence. I think we've given you evidence that we have a hardship because of the shape of the site. We feel like that the buffer that we will provide a better buffer than what is required because of the heavier landscape standard. With the 6 inches of right-of-way, we think the ultimate section could be constructed even without that additional dedication. And we think that we do worry that sign and the wall will be damaged if we should be required to widen the road. Finally, we do believe that the site plan meets all the LDO standards, and other than the 2 modifications we're requesting, and we request approval. Available for any questions.
Thank you. This time I'll invite other speakers who have been sworn in who wish to speak in support of the application to approach the podium. Seeing no one, I would invite cross-examination of the witness who testified, any witnesses who testified in support of the request. Now open the public hearing to those who are opposed to the request. Anyone at all? Okay, I'll call on town staff for any testimony they wish to add.
Thank you. And just as last time, staff has reviewed the applicant's request and offers the following professional analysis for council's consideration. In regards to the buffer reduction, the site was designed in the 90s, and I'm not going to rehash a lot of what the applicant already testified to. There was a reduction in the buffer. The recordation of said reduction in regards to documentation was not as complete as staff would like today. It was handwritten on the plan, so it was unclear to what it applied to, and the minutes were unclear as well. So this is really a cleanup. Staff's analysis is it's consistent with the 10-foot reduction, which is obvious along the southwest portion of the property adjacent to the existing display area. The existing storage shed is located approximately 15.5 feet, 16 feet away from the property line, so that would be encroaching regardless. And the reality is the majority of that, or at least half of that additional 10 feet, which would require under today's ordinance, has already been cleared, is being used for storage. It's got gravel, asphalt. So there's a very limited disturbance of existing vegetation. What the existing vegetation there is small scrub pines and small understory saplings. There's no significant vegetation that would be disturbed by reducing that buffer. In addition, as the applicant has indicated, they are proposing to either keep or add fence. This plan, which is what we've been reviewing, says it's a proposed 500 feet of fence headed toward the north-northeast. They're saying it's existing, but either way, there'll be a privacy fence in that buffer and additional shrubs, which will raise it from a type C aesthetic, which is intermittent visual screening, to a semi-opaque, which is completely opaque, to a height of at least 6 feet. So while we're reducing the width, we're getting a higher performance standard in regards to screening the railroad tracks. The right-of-way concern, as the applicant has indicated, the additional 6 inches of right-of-way is really not going to provide any benefit to the town. Any maintenance we need to do on the sidewalk is going to be performed from the street side of the sidewalk in any case. That's basically half of the 1-foot shoulder we typically have outside the sidewalk. As the applicant mentioned, there is existing hardscape that has been installed by the applicant over the years. That does abut the right-of-way or the property line. Here you can see a stone wall placed around that utility pole, which is located immediately adjacent to the sidewalk. NCDOT policy would say that wall needs to come out of the right-of-way today. So There's really no, staff's opinion, there's really no benefit to getting the additional 6 inches of right-of-way, and there's a definite aesthetic value to some of the hardscaping that's been placed in what would be right-of-way if it gets dedicated. So that concludes staff's analysis. We're available if you have any questions following your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you. This time I'll ask if anyone has objections to evidence or testimony that's been presented. Seeing none, we'll move on. Does either party believe new evidence has been presented that warrants a continuance of this hearing? Nope. All right, we're now open the deliberative phase of the hearing. Open it up to council members for questions or comments. Ms. Eckhart.
I'd like to start with a motion.
That's after we close the deliberative phase of the hearing, we can get to the motion.
I think-
Anybody? Close it. All right, we're closing it.
I
moving
can
to the
read
public-
this, council. Okay. Looks like Lisa might want to say something.
Sorry. I was going to talk to Mr. Hales. I wanted to clarify, you will see there's a condition in your second motion, and I have talked with Ms. Maddox because I wanted to clarify from them, and I don't know if this was a concern you all had, about the existing parking that happens on the road right-of-way. There was a mention in their materials to us, phrasing of eliminating that parking, but it's my understanding from our conversation just now, they do not plan to eliminate the on-street parking that's occurring. We had put a potential condition in there when you get to the second motion. That's something you all may wish to talk about a little bit more.
You mean the motion about the site plan?
Yes.
Okay. I'm ready to start with the main one.
All right.
Okay. For the reasons discussed, I move that we approve the modification request, specifically being a reduction in the streetscape adjacent to the railroad track, but an improvement in opacity, and as a matter of practicality, waiving the 6 inches of right-of-way, as the requests meet all the approved criteria of the applicable sections of the LDO.
Second.
There's a motion, second. Discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Site plan.
I'll be happy to try to wing it, Kevin, with your help. So for the reasons discussed, I move that we approve the proposed site plan with
Without condition?
Without condition.
If that's your choice, or with the condition we proposed.
I'm going to say without condition. We'll see how that flies with you folks. So as it meets all of the approval criteria set forth in section 3.9.2I of the LDO.
Second.
There's a motion, second. Discussion.
I would just say that with additional parking on this site, there will hopefully be less on-street parking. The on-street parking is necessary because there's not enough on-site parking.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing, I would like to commend the applicant because I have shopped there before, and they didn't have to do it, but adding the access to the road where there is a sidewalk, that's a phenomenal addition that was not required, that I was really glad they brought forward.
The only other comment I would add is,
Looking at me like maybe it was.
sorry y'all had to go through all this to get this. I don't know what it cost, but I'm sorry. So in the future, just a suggestion, 6 inches a foot, can that be staff and maybe not so much council? I understand rules are rules and laws are laws.
I bet we had to do that because of the buffer reduction.
Actually, they both require any waiver to right-of-way
I got it,
dedication
but it
and any
just-
buffer reduction.
We do not want to figure out cost per inch, I can tell you that.
It's expensive, 6 inches.
Right.
Other comments, questions? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute, we're not done yet.
Close it.
Anything else, Mr. Silverstein?
You need to close.
Right. All right, we'll close the public hearing, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There's a motion, second, discussion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.